Hello everyone, welcome to Nature Live. I'm going to be your host today, Alistair. It's great to see you. Thank you very much for joining us. If this is your first time joining us here online, let me tell you a little bit about what Nature Live Online is all about. If you've ever visited the Natural History Museum in London, you may have seen our live studio shows. Nature Live is a chance for you to meet some of the scientists that work behind the scenes at the museum and the wonderful collection that we have there. But for a few months now, we've been coming to you from our homes. We know that not everybody can make it to the museum, even though we have now reopened. So today we're coming to you live online. You can send us in your questions today. We're going to be exploring some amazing adaptations in the wonderful world of mammals. So if you've got any questions at all during the show, please just pop them in the chat there and we will try and get through as many of them as we can. So today, to join me and to talk about these wonderful animals, I've got one of our museum specialists. I'm joined by Heather White, who is going to talk to us about some of these incredible adaptations. Thank you very much, Heather, for joining us. How are you today?
Hi, Arthur. Thank you for having me. Yeah, I'm great, thank you. Pleased that the temperature has decreased a little bit since a couple of weeks ago. It's much more bearable working from home now.
Yes, it certainly is. It's been very hot. Those of you that don't live in London, it's been extremely hot recently. It has finally cooled down, but rather appropriately, we're going to be talking about how some animals adapt to the heat during today's show. So Heather, just to get us started, can you tell us a little bit about what you actually do at the museum? What's your role?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a PhD student at the museum. So I work in the research side of things at the museum, so kind of behind the scenes. And I study mammals, looking at their evolution and their development. So I'm really lucky to be able to work at the museum on something that I love so much.
Is it a sort of a bit of a dream job to be able to work with the collections?
Yeah, so I mean, I came to the museum as a child with my family years and years ago now, and just fell in love with the museum, its collections, its building. It's a wonderful place to be based. Obviously, hopefully I can get back there sometime soon.
Excellent. So you're part of a research group at the museum, aren't you? Can you tell us a little bit about the work that that group does?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is me working with the CT scanner at the Natural History Museum. So this is one of the pieces of equipment we have in the basement that help us study the different specimens that we've got. So basically what this does is it digitizes the specimens that we have in the collection. So the thousands and millions of specimens that we've got, we're able to look at them on a computer without destroying the specimen itself. So really, really great piece of software. And everyone in my research group work using this kind of method of digitizing specimens, but we all work on different animals. So I work on mammals, we've got people who work on whales, people who work on amphibians, birds, like a huge array of species, dinosaurs as well. We cover everything.
Yeah, lots of animals to choose. Now, you said you pick mammals particularly. What is it about mammals? They are very popular. A lot of visitors come to the museum, and their favorite galleries are often the mammal galleries with all the skeletons and the wonderful taxidermy everywhere. What drew you to mammals? Were you one of those visitors as a kid that just loved just seeing those animals and want to know more about them?
Absolutely. I mean, I loved the mammal corridor, as a child, and seeing just the diversity of species that, you can see so easily. I mean, everyone has seen a mammal in their life, and they're just so relatable as animals because, we have them as pets, and they just exist everywhere. So they're hugely diverse. And I think that's one of the main things that attracted me, not to mention that my favorite animal is also a mammal, which is the giraffe. And I just fell in love with that one ever since I was about 1 year old. So it was
excellent choice. Now, it is interesting you talk about one of the things that we're so familiar with mammals in some ways because we are mammals ourselves, of course, but they've managed to find their way into so many different environments. And we can see here, for example, this even the ocean environment is occupied by a lot of mammals, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So a huge diverse range of habitats. So, the oceans, you've got the snowy kind of environments in the Arctic, you've got rainforest environments, you've got the desert, really arid environments, and all these species have created a huge number of adaptations that they're able to adapt really nicely to the different environments. So, for example, the species in the water, so you've got things like whales and seals. Often people, think of marine environments and only think of things like fish or sharks, but these animals really thrive in these environments. And they've developed, instead of having legs, they have the fins instead to help them move through their environment really easily. You've got animals like the sloth, for example, on the screen, which really thrives in its kind of rainforest environment. It's very well camouflaged to this environment. And also, you can see from its hands, like the claws that it has, which help it kind of move through the trees in a way that many other animals, just can't do. As well. And even the polar bear up in the Arctic, you see the polar bear and you see its really, really thick fur coat. You go outside in the winter and you want to put a coat on, and this animal has an inbuilt coat for these environments. It's quite phenomenal, really.
Excellent. Okay, well, there's a whole range of different environments, and in the time that we've got, there's so many different mammals that we could talk about. But today we're going to focus our talking on one environment in particular, the arid environment, the kind of hot desert environment. Now, it feels like in London that it's a lot of our parks have been turning this color recently with all the hot weather that we had a few weeks ago. So we're going to focus on that environment today. But just before we dive into that, we've got a question coming from Facebook. This is from Natalie, and she's asking about an environment that can often be quite arid, actually, Australia. She's asking, did Australia's isolation help to create our amazing wildlife? So yeah, Australia is quite famous, I suppose, for having some quite unusual animals there, particularly mammals.
Yeah, absolutely. So Australia has a huge number of marsupials, so things like kangaroos, wombat kind of animals. These are all marsupials, which means they give birth to their young very early on, and then they keep them in their pouches to help them develop, rather than kind of having a really long gestation period like lots of other mammals. So they're quite different, but very, very unique set of species living in that environment. And I mean, Australia, going back to kind of our desertous environments, people often think of these environments as being just in Africa, for example. On the continent of Africa, but actually these exist all across the world. So you have this kind of desertous environment in America, Asia, Africa, even Australia as well, where you have these kind of kangaroo marsupial species. So that's, one of the amazing, unique things about Australia, and one of the reasons why they're so keen to protect, obviously, their wildlife, because it is so unique there.
It certainly is. Excellent. Well, let's take a look at some animals that thrive in this environment, and we'll take a look at a few in turn, and you can maybe talk to us, Heather, about how those animals are able to cope with some pretty extreme temperatures, because these environments are definitely challenging for any animal. So let's look at the first one next. So what have we got here?
So this is the hyena. So this is a big hunting kind of animal, and it lives in obviously these desertous, arid environments. And kind of the key challenges for these different animals in this actual environment is they have very little water in these environments. Obviously, it's so hot, so not much water stays on the surface for particularly very long. Also, lots of dust and sand in these environments as well, which is hard for the animals to deal with. It gets in your eyes. And also the temperature, obviously they have a really, really high temperature in these environments. But also, not only is the temperature so high, but it's actually also really cold. So the desert and these arid environments actually have the biggest temperature difference in one day anywhere on the planet. So they go from 0 degrees up to 40 degrees, which is just absolutely amazing. And so the way that this hyena adapted to this kind of environment is it deals with the temperature in a pretty great way. And I mean, one that me and you, certainly Alistair, can relate to with the high temperatures that we've had recently. So this animal is actually a nocturnal animal. So it means it comes out at night, it hunts for its prey at night. And meaning it's avoiding, all these high temperatures during the day time. So it's much more, doesn't have to deal with the getting really hot whilst it's running around trying to catch its prey, and instead it just rests during the really high temperatures. And also from this animal, you can also see it's actually got a very big snout and nose region in particular. And within this region, what it has is got a really high number of blood vessels that help to transfer heat to its external environment and help to keep the animal quite cool as well.
Yeah, it's, you know, now that you mention it, actually, when you look at the snout of the hyena, the nose does seem quite prominent, certainly compared to even like the size of its eyes, for example.
Yeah,
it's a lot bigger, yeah, when you really look at it. Now we've had a question come in from Adam on YouTube, and he's asking, how long does the average mammal take to adapt to changes in its environment? So yeah, I'm guessing, are we meaning in a kind of evolutionary sense, maybe there? How long? Because some of these adaptations we're going to look at are very specific, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, all these adaptations, you know, specific to each animal. So how long they take is very specific to each species in itself. But I mean, for these adaptations, you're talking kind of years and millions of years for these adaptations to occur. From kind of their ancestors that were developed in those regions, and slowly, you know, through natural selection and so on, the kind of key features that are very, very useful for these environments have stayed on, would you like, with these animals. Great question.
Okay, thanks for your questions, guys. Keep them coming. Let's move on to the next animal on our list then. Now, this is if we think of an animal and the desert, this is probably the first one we all think about. Of course, the camel. So tell us how this animal's adapted to the desert.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, the key feature that you can see on the camel that everyone knows about is the humps on the camel. And there's a very common misconception with the humps on the camel. And actually, lots of people think that this animal uses it to store water, because obviously it doesn't have very much water around and it does need this water to be able to survive. But actually, it doesn't store its water in the hump. What it actually stores in the hump instead is fat that it gets from the food and so on that it eats. And instead, when it metabolizes this fat during this process, it produces water that then gives that to the animal to kind of cope with this very little amount of water that it actually has. So yeah, next time you see a camel, it's not water in its hump, it's actually the fat instead that then gives it the water that it needs. As well with the camel, one of the key characteristics that I think many people would know about the camel is actually it's got very, very long, beautiful eyelashes. And these are help it deal with the sand environment, because obviously sometimes, you know, it can be quite windy in these environments as well, bringing up all the dust, and with there not being much water, there's just much more dust kind of around. So these help protect its eyes during really dusty periods. You know, if you wear glasses or, you know, you're out in sunglasses, you would know that obviously that kind of helps to protect your eyes. So it's quite a similar adaptation for the camel there.
Definitely, I can relate to being on a windy beach and getting the sand in the face. It's not nice. Not nice. Yeah. So yeah, camels very successfully adapted then to that environment. And yeah, interesting to put to rest that idea that the hump's not full of water, which I guess sort of makes sense. You'd think it would be, but it doesn't need to be in this instance.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on to the next one. Now this is not something I typically think of when I think of arid environments. What have we got here?
Yeah, so this is the bighorn sheep, and as you said, Alistair, you know, it's not one that you would typically think of, but if you remember, we've got these desert arid environments across all parts of the world, so over in America, Asia, Africa, Australia. So this animal obviously, you know, isn't the typical African animal that you would think of with the desert. And you know, I mean, it's got its name, obviously, the bighorn sheep, from very creatively the way it looks. And it's the way this animal deals with the temperature, certainly the temperature change that you get throughout a year as well. This animal has a change of coat. So in the winter, it has a very, very thick coat that it has to keep it warm. But obviously during the summer months, it gets much warmer than it does in the winter. So it loses this coat in the summer months, kind of in the spring kind of time is when it loses its fur to help keep it cooler.
Excellent. Well, that ties in actually quite nicely with a question we've got from Facebook. Sandra is saying that my 8-year-old asked, if it's so hot, Why do they need fur?
Oh,
it's a
great
good question, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, it's traditionally something that mammals generally have, and is a characteristic feature of mammals. So, I mean, most mammals do generally have fur. You know, you don't think of obviously the whale and so on in the ocean. Obviously, has adapted to not have fur because it would probably slow it down quite a lot. But even these animals, you know, they are having to still deal with very cold temperatures in the desert, as well as it being very hot. So it's still quite advantageous for it to keep warm as well in these environments.
I think that's a really good point, actually, because I think certainly in the UK where we are, although it does get hot for some weeks in the summer, we don't necessarily experience really rapidly over the course of one day the temperature changes that some of these animals do in the desert, where it can be baking hot during the day, and then at night really like winter cold almost.
Yeah, absolutely.
We don't really get those extremes, do we?
No, certainly not. I mean, we probably deal with only about 10-degree temperature difference across the day, which, I mean, still sometimes feels like quite a lot. But imagine having a 40-degree temperature difference every day.
Yeah,
pretty phenomenal.
Would be quite hard to deal with, I think. Okay, let's move on then to the next one.
Sunglasses, I think, if it's that big temperature difference.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, fantastic. Now look at this. It's a beautiful animal here. This looks like a cheetah.
Yeah, absolutely. You're correct with this one. So this is really well adapted to its environment. Obviously, you know, the fastest land mammal. Everyone loves that about this animal. But the way this animal adapts is, I mentioned earlier that the hyena is a nocturnal animal. The cheetah isn't actually a nocturnal animal, and it's active during the day, but it's active during kind of the cooler parts of the day. So dawn and dusk. So kind of like you and I, you know, we still sleep at night even when it's really hot, but we generally are a bit more active in the evening when it gets cooler in the summertime. And this animal, because it's cooler, it's more successful at hunting during this time because it just doesn't get quite as hot for it. But also because it's one of the few animals that is actually active during the daytime, it means that it doesn't have quite as much competition for its food as well. So meaning it would be more successful as well. And similarly to the hyena as well, you can see again, it's got quite a big nose on it. And this again has lots of blood vessels to help with the heat transfer and help keep its brain cooler than the rest of its body, which is really important when it's hunting, so that it's able to remain kind of switched on and know exactly what's going on rather than, you know, overheating. Certainly I feel very lethargic when it gets too hot.
Definitely. That's interesting that it needs to keep the brain, in order to function at sort of peak performance, it needs to be a bit cooler than the rest of it. Now we've got a question that's come in actually specifically about the cheetah. This is from Alvi on YouTube, 7-year-old asking, to the nearest 5 miles per hour, how fast can a cheetah run?
So I believe it's about 70 miles per hour that they actually get up to in their peak speed. I believe it's around that.
So that's like a car on a motorway.
Yeah, exactly. Pretty fast. And I believe they can get to like 0 to 60 miles an hour in something like 3 seconds. It's pretty phenomenal.
You're not outrunning one of these guys, are you?
No.
Excellent. Okay, let's move on to our next example. Right, now this guy looks a little bit rough around the edges, I have to say.
Yeah.
Has it been in a fight or something?
No, so this is the coyote, and this actually, the roughness that you can kind of see around its edges, it looks like it's in the middle of its kind of molting season. So this is when it changes its coat. So similar to the bighorn sheep, this animal adapts to its environment by having kind of a winter coat and a summer coat as well. And I think this photo has been caught in its kind of spring period, where it's changing its fur from the winter coat to the summer coat again.
Yeah, we can see it. It looks a bit sort of scraggly, doesn't it, around around it when it's losing that fur.
Yeah.
How long does that process take of actually losing fur? Because this is definitely a common thread among a lot of mammals, that they're losing that winter coat. Is that something that takes like a few days to sort of shed, or does it take much longer than that?
Yeah, so this, I mean, it's different for each animal. Obviously, the bigger the animal, it probably takes a bit longer because it's got more fur to get rid of. But this generally happens over a few week kind of period. So in the spring for a few weeks of the year, this happens. With the coyote as well, this animal, you know, it looks quite similar to your dog if you've got a dog, it looks quite similar. And if you've got a dog, and in the summer months, certainly, these animals pant quite a lot because they get quite hot. And this actually helps with evaporation to help cool the animal down. So it's panting over the moist surfaces, which help to get rid of some of the heat in the animal as well. So really cool adaptation there. That
panting, yeah, I think a lot of us will associate, will certainly know that from, if we've got dogs. That's a very common thing they do, isn't it?
Yeah.
Just sort of a hot day in the corner, just panting away. Give them a bowl of water. Brilliant. Okay, let's move on. I think the next one that we'll look at is one that you've said is very close to your heart. The beautiful giraffe. Now they look stunning, but how are they actually adapted to this desert environment that they find themselves in?
Yeah, so I mean, the characteristic feature of the giraffe, which I'm sure attracts lots of people to it, not just myself, but is its incredibly long neck. This actually helps the animal reach for its food, because the giraffes actually eat this tree called the acacia tree, which is obviously, quite high up, being a tree, which means lots of other animals in this environment are much lower down. So they aren't actually having quite so much competition for this food with it being higher up. So that's really good adaptation of it. But not only this, this tree is actually very succulent and very moist. So it means that the giraffe doesn't actually have to actually drink too much water, because it gets a lot of the water that it does need from its food. And but interestingly, the food itself on this tree, it's an incredibly spiky tree. I don't know if anyone's seen a picture, but they don't look the most pleasant things to actually eat. And I certainly wouldn't like to give it a try. But the giraffe actually has a very, very leathery mouth, which helps protect it against the spikes, and means it doesn't have a problem at all eating these trees. So really, really cool. And with its spots as well, a very key feature of the giraffe, everyone recognizes its pattern. And it's thought that the pattern on the giraffe, in the darker patches, it's got a higher concentration of blood vessels, which help to release heat into the environment as well, to help keep it cooler. So really cool animal.
So the actual color of the animal can help, in terms of regulating how hot it is, the temperature.
Absolutely.
Brilliant. Okay, I'm just going to pause there for a second. We've got a few questions that have come through, so thank you very much, guys, for your questions. Do keep them coming. We will try and get through as many of them as we can. I'm just going to pick up one here. So this is from Joe on Facebook. Joe's asking, my 5-year-old son, Win, would like to know, are there any mammals other than the saber-toothed tiger that had teeth as big?
Oh, great question. So the saber-toothed tiger is obviously a cat. So it's like a big cat kind of animal. So if you think of the cheetah, the leopard, those kinds of animals. But actually the saber-toothed tiger is quite different from the ones we have today, and it does have much bigger teeth. Certainly the front teeth, than the species we have today. It's quite characteristic of that in that animal. So unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on if you ever meet one of these animals, that they don't have teeth quite so big today.
Yeah, I always imagine that a saber-toothed tiger, life would be quite hard if you've got huge teeth hanging out of your mouth all the time. I can't imagine. Maybe that's useful when you're trying to hunt your next meal, but any other time, I imagine they get in the way. But who knows? We'd have to ask one and see what it's like. Okay, so yeah, thank you very much, Win, for that question. Another question. This is about the cheetah that we spoke about earlier. This is from Elizabeth on YouTube. For how many hours can a cheetah run?
Well, that's a really good question. So the cheetah kind of generally functions so it runs really, really quickly. So it's a bit like Usain Bolt in that, he does his 100-meter sprint, and then at the end of that, he's pretty wiped out after that. And that's quite similar to the cheetah in that it does very, very, very short stints where it runs. So it's not like Mo Farah. It doesn't run, the marathons, London Marathon. It doesn't do that. It's just very, very short stints. So very comparable to Usain Bolt, really.
Yeah, no, that's I'm personally much more of a sprinter. I think I like running 100 meters, but after that, I'm ready for a rest. Excellent. Okay, well, let's move on. So that's the giraffe that we looked at before. Let's move on to our next animal. which is quite a different one. Now, this one, at first glance, looks very familiar. This looks like some kind of rabbit or hare to me.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is what's called the jackrabbit. So bang on there, Alistair. It looks quite similar to, your pet rabbit that you would have at home, or the hares that you might see around in the countryside as well. And this animal, whilst it looks quite similar, it's also actually quite different. So you can see it's got really, really huge ears on it. And its ears are nearly half its body size. Like, they are absolutely huge. And this increases the animal's surface area like tremendously by having these ears. So it means that the animal is actually able to let heat off much easier by having this higher surface area, and higher concentration of blood vessels as well in these ears, which means it can transfer heat quite nicely between the internal body and also the external environment to help it stay cool.
Okay, so that idea of surface area and helping regulate heat, I think that could be quite a tricky thing for people to kind of grasp. But
yeah,
I've noticed that, particularly when it was hot recently, that if I was really uncomfortably hot, if I ran my hands under the cold tap, I found that there was something about the fact that if you kind of opened up your fingers like that it felt really cooling.
Yeah,
yes. And is that because of your hand is quite a large surface area?
Yeah, absolutely.
Is that the same idea, that it's an effective way of releasing heat?
You obviously have like your fingers, which are all in contact with the external environment, increasing this kind of area that your hand has. So similar to this rabbit ears, very, very similar concept. Yeah. Excellent.
Okay, let's move on to the next animal here. Now look at this. This must be the cutest one on our list today. What have we got here?
Yeah, so this one's pretty adorable, and this is the kangaroo rat. So you can actually see, from its tail, quite characteristic of a rat that you'd recognize if you're from London. I'm sure you've seen them running around on the tube all the time on the platforms. But this one is definitely much cuter. This is one of the most well adapted animals to these desert environments. It's just phenomenal, and it has a really, really great way of dealing with the temperature difference. So obviously, as I mentioned before, the temperature difference in these environments goes from about 0 to 40 degrees in just one day. But what the kangaroo rat does is it actually burrows under the surface of the to keep it much cooler, and this helps keep it in the shade. But also by burrowing, it means during the day it actually only has a 10-degree temperature difference instead of having to cope with this 40-degree temperature difference. So pretty clever idea. I think I would certainly be joining him down the hole if it was a 40-degree temperature difference.
Yes, because that must mean in the course of a day that when the temperature starts to drop, it must drop really quickly to come from such a high point to such a low point.
Absolutely.
Just as the sun goes down.
Certainly, yeah. Just as the sun goes down, it basically changes pretty dramatically. So with this animal, one of the fascinating things with it is similarly to many of the other animals we've spoken about today, it gets most of its water from its food. So it eats quite succulent, juicy kind of plants. And again, like the camel, it's able to kind of metabolize this food and the fat that it gets from the food into water. So it never actually has to take a drink, this animal, which is pretty amazing. I hope the poor thing doesn't ever feel thirsty, because that wouldn't be very pleasant.
Yeah, can you imagine? That's never taking a drink, but just getting everything from your food. I wonder what that feels like. Because of course humans could never do that, because you'd have to eat such a vast amount of food. I imagine you'd be incredibly obese, I think, if you had to do that.
Absolutely.
So on this note, actually looking at this is a tiny little mammal, isn't it? We had a question earlier from Chewy from Sydney asking, what is the smallest mammal?
Oh, great.
Surely this must be a contender, is it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is a tiny wee animal. But many rodents are quite small. There's quite a lot of small rodents, but the other animals that are also quite small, there's quite a few bats that are very small. I think it may be one of the bats that's actually one of the smallest mammals, which is pretty good.
Which very helpfully is actually, I think, next on our list. If we look at the next one, the bats. Now, it's interesting. Bats are, I don't think we often think of bats immediately when we're thinking of mammals, but they are incredibly numerous, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you often just think of bats as being one species of animal, but actually there are thousands and thousands of species of bats that do exist. And often people mistake these animals for being birds because they fly. But this is another, amazing adaptation of mammals that have helped them thrive in their environments, in that they, can fly between the cliffs, between trees. You often picture bats, hanging upside down under some bridge somewhere, or under a house upside down. And this is exactly how this animal actually deals with the temperature difference in the desert. So it tends to hide in the crevices in the cliffs, which means it's staying in areas that are much more shaded than being out in the open, perhaps, which, it's not surprising there's so many of them all squished in together if they're all trying to get that one small bit of shade.
I do wonder if they're all so squished together, they're all going to warm each other up with their own body heat, aren't they? I wonder if they figured out, hang on a minute, maybe I'd be better off just flying off somewhere else and being on my own.
Yeah, they're quite social animals, so they do tend to stick together. So I'm not sure they would ever want to venture out on their own, but perhaps.
Perhaps. Excellent. Well, let's look at one more example before we move on. And this is a beautiful picture. What have we got here?
This is the ringtail, and this, probably it's named because of its tail. Very nice bushy tail with these beautiful black and white rings on it. And this animal, similarly to many of the other animals that we've spoken about today, it is a nocturnal animal. So the ringtail is active during night, which means it again avoids the really high temperatures of the day. And one of the ways that it does, again, hide from the really hot temperatures, is modeling it quite nicely here on the rock, is that during the daytime, it would actually hide under rocks like this, similarly to the bat, to get the shade in these areas, just to hide from the blazing sun in the middle of the day.
Excellent. Okay. There's been a sort of a theme developing through some of these. There's clearly a lot of animals kind of alter their behavior to cope with the heat. So there seems to be a lot of tend to be more active at night is a common theme, and the same stuff that we do. We're mammals too, and we'll sit in the shade if it's really hot during the day, and people certainly recently have sort of come out in the evenings when it's cooled down a bit and it's much more comfortable. So yeah, we're not so dissimilar really, are we, when we look at what some of these animals are doing to cope with the hot weather.
No, definitely.
Okay, so I'm going to just pause there. We've had lots of questions come in. Thank you so much, guys, for your questions. I'm going to go through a few of these now, Heather, if you're okay to answer some of these, and then we'll move on. So we had a couple of questions about the giraffe that you spoke of earlier. So that was your favorite one, you said. Yeah. So we've got one question here from YouTube. This is, how many babies can a giraffe give birth to?
I believe it's only one baby that they have. They're quite big mammals, so quite similar, to ourselves, in that we generally only have one baby, unless somebody has twins or triplets. So on the whole, it's the one baby, which means obviously if you've had a child, it's much easier to look after just the one than 6 of them in one go. I think that would be pretty hard going.
Yes, I can't imagine. Having one is enough. I think I can speak from experience. Another giraffe question is, why is the giraffe's tongue black?
So the black on its tongue, it goes back to kind of it being quite leathery. It's just because of the the material, that it's made from. You think of leather and you often think of quite dark colours. So it's quite similar to this.
Right, and following on from that, we've got a question from Frankie, 6 years old, asks, how does the leather tongue help stop the spikes from hurting the giraffe?
Yeah, a great question, Frankie. So leather, if you've got any shoes or a bag or anything that's leather, when you're walking down the street, often if you stand on something in your leather shoes, this often doesn't hurt particularly because your feet are protected in the leather shoes because it's quite a thick material, which is exactly the same as with the giraffe. So it's just helping to protect it from the spikes. So hopefully for the poor giraffe, I don't think the spikes hurt it, or I don't think it would carry on eating the tree.
I think it would stop pretty quickly, wouldn't you? If every time it took a mouthful, it was bleeding, it wouldn't be very nice. So yeah, I'm sure it's working. So yeah, that kind of thick leather is tough and helps protect it from the spikes. So thank you, Frankie, for that question. Got a couple more here. This one is from we've got one here from Virgil on YouTube. Are there any mammals which live permanently in Antarctica? So that's a very
yeah,
different environment to what we've been looking at. So I guess if they do, they would have very different adaptations.
Yeah, so obviously when you think of Antarctica, you often think of penguins and so on, animals that are well adapted to the cold. There are several mammals that do live in Antarctica, but more of these are kind of the marine mammals. So seals, for example, there's quite a lot of whales in these regions as well. These are often migratory mammals, so whether they stay there all the time, I'm not 100% sure, but they do live for certainly large periods in these very cold environments.
Excellent. Okay. Another question. This one from Facebook, from Alison. Why is it called a kangaroo rat? So yeah, we talked about that lovely cute little rodent, but it was the kangaroo rat. That's an interesting name for it. Why is it called that?
Yeah. So I'm assuming it's kind of behaves very similarly to a kangaroo if you are over in Australia. That is quite a bouncy animal. So I'm assuming that this animal is quite similar to the kangaroo in that it has quite a bouncy behavior about it, hence it getting its name kangaroo rat.
Bouncing around, yeah, rather than kind of scurrying, I guess, like we think of rats in this country. Okay, I'm going to take one more now before we move on. This one from Heidi. I think this is in reference to the ringtail that we looked at earlier. Why do they have such a long tail?
Yeah, good question. Often these sorts of animals, so if you picture lemurs as well, or monkey kind of animals, the tails kind of often help them maneuver through their environment. So they almost use it as like a fifth limb in a way. So I imagine that this ringtail uses it in quite a similar way, not to mention that it is absolutely beautiful, the tail as well. So it's probably a lot to do with its mating as well and trying to impress its other half.
They certainly walk around kind of showing it off, don't they?
Absolutely.
When they're on the move. Yeah, it looks very impressive. Excellent. Okay, thank you very much, guys, for your questions. I know we didn't get through everyone's. We will try and come back to some more at the end, but I do want to spend a bit of time, Heather, to talk about the research that you're doing at the museum. So you're using these collections and really building up your knowledge about these mammals, but you're part of a research lab, aren't you? We can see yourself and your colleagues in this image here. So tell us a little bit about your research specifically and what it is that you're trying to find out.
Yeah, sure. So I'm using this scanning equipment to be able to scan the different specimens in the museum. So I can scan either the skull kind of collection. So if you've been to the museum, you can see Hope in the main hall and the big skull on Hope. I mean, I haven't scanned Hope's skull, but there are lots of other specimens in the museum that I have scanned. They're quite similar to Hope's skull. So imagine that, but in a little scanner, and being able to digitize it like this. But also the spirit collections at the museum as well, I'm able to scan those too. So it means that we don't have to destroy the specimen when we're studying it. So in 1,000 years' time, somebody else can come back, and hopefully the techniques will have got so much better by then that they'll be able to discover lots of new fantastic things that we don't know today about these animals.
Yeah, it's a really exciting. Sorry, I was just saying it's a really exciting idea that the specimen that was collected maybe 100 years ago, you can use it today in a way that the person who collected it couldn't even have imagined. There were no scanners, computers, anything like that. And it does make you think, if that specimen stays in the museum in 100 years' time, in 500 years' time, what will people be able to find out from that specimen with new technology? It's quite exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, going through the collections at the museum, which obviously I'm lucky enough to be able to do, you go through the labels on some of the specimens, and many of them are from 1700s as well, which is just phenomenal.
So what is it you're looking at a very specific part of a lot of the skulls, aren't you? Can you tell us about that?
I am. Yeah, so I'm looking in the skull. You can see these kind of lines between the different bones of the skull. So one of the really interesting things about the skull, often people think it's just one whole bone, but actually it's made up of lots and lots of different bones. And it's separated by these joints, which are the little lines that you can see. And these differ across all the different species of mammal. So sometimes they're very, very squiggly, sometimes they're very straight, sometimes they end up being fused together or open. So if you think of a baby when a baby is born. They often, if you've ever held a baby, you might know this, that they have holes kind of in the back of their head. And that's when these bones are kind of coming together to form these joints to then protect the brain. So the function of these joints does change throughout the life of the different mammals as well. So what I'm doing is hoping to be able to understand whether these joints, if they're very straight, if they're very squiggly, if they're closed, if they're open, what this can actually tell us about the overall shape of the skull and how this differs across all the different mammals, and how this also differs throughout development, and whether the process changes in different points of development for different animals, for example.
Right, at this level of detail that you're looking at the skull, I guess, wouldn't have been really feasible a few years ago.
No, certainly not. So the scanner that we have at the museum is very, very high resolution, which means I'm able to see lots of the details within the skull itself. So this can allow me to kind of position points on the surface of the skull to then look at the shape of these joints. You can see all the little dots that then form almost like a dot-to-dot pattern on the skull. And what this gives me is it gives me a set of coordinates that I can then understand the overall shape of the joints and also of the skull itself as well, and see whether one is influencing the other.
And then I guess like that's, you know, in the future, like far in the future, someone could look and maybe see how these skulls have changed over countless generations, as because evolution is happening and animals are changing very, very slowly, and you could track that change if you could get far enough into the future and look at it.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the interesting things about these joints as well is not only do they actually change in the mammal species, but they also change in humans as well. So if you have a baby that's born with a developmental defect, for example, the skull can often form a different shape to a normal skull shape. And this is often the result of the action of these joints and shaping the overall skull shape. So we do have examples of this in humans and in medicine as well. So hopefully this is a very adaptable field to adaptable research to lots and lots of different fields to help different people understand different things as well.
Excellent. While we're on this this subject as well, we've had a question come in from Sophie. She's asking, do the squiggly joints that we can see in the picture just there, do they stay in the same pattern once the mammal is an adult?
Yeah, so obviously they differ, as I said, throughout development, but within the adulthood, there is lots and lots of things that could still change the shape of these joints. So, for example, things like diet are known to affect the shape of them. And so if you've got you're eating a very hard, tough food to eat, this can affect the shape of them. And this is still thought to happen in the adult specimen as well as through development. But obviously things do become more stable when a specimen becomes an adult. So great question.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Thank you guys for your questions. Now we're running out of time, but I did want to give you all guys a chance at home to test your mammal skills and your identification skills. So we're going to have a little quiz to wrap up things today. So what we're going to do is we've got some images of skulls, the kind of thing that Heather would look at. Heather, if you don't mind, you can talk us through some of the features that you see in this particular skull, and we want you guys at home to have a guess, type in the chat what you think the animal might be based on the scan of the skull that we've got. So here's our first one. So Heather, tell us about the features that kind of speak to you when you see something like this.
Sure. So obviously, one of the questions earlier with the saber-toothed tiger mentioned about the teeth. And you can see from this skull that actually the teeth are really, really quite big on this specimen, certainly the ones at the front compared to the other teeth, just like the saber-toothed tiger, which would kind of suggest it's some kind of cat carnivorous animal, so it's a meat eater. You can also see on the back of the skull as well, you can see kind of at the top, there's this very crusty part, on the skull image, and that has a very, very big surface area, which allows for a very, very big muscle to be able to attach to. And this is where the muscle that helps with jaw opening and closing actually would attach. So suggesting that this animal would have actually quite a big bite force as well. So again, supporting our idea that it would be a carnivore of some kind. So these, again, are all animals that we have spoken about during the presentation today. So there's no trick questions in here as well.
Okay, so yes, we have spoken about these ones, so that'll give you a bit of a clue. So we've had a couple of comments coming in. We've got Sally saying she thinks it's a carnivore, which you confirmed that definitely looks the case. Hannah thinks it might be a dog. We've got lion from Sophie. Another commenter suggesting it might be a hyena, which we did look at before. So let's see. Let's put everyone out of their misery and have a look at what was this one.
Yeah, so congratulations to those who said it was a hyena. You were absolutely bang on.
Spot on.
It is the hyena, and this animal actually has one of the highest bite forces out of any of the different mammals on the planet, and it can actually bite through the long bone. So if you imagine your thigh on a giraffe, and they're pretty hefty animals, and it can actually bite through the bone of that animal. So I mean, pretty amazing.
Yeah, stay well clear of the hyenas, I would say, if they're hungry. Excellent, well done if you got that one. Let's move on to the next one. Quickly have a look at this. Well, this is a very different looking, very different shaped skull here.
Yeah, definitely. So with this one, obviously it's got quite a protruding nose region. You've got these two teeth at the front, which compared to the hyena are actually a lot smaller. But then if you look at the teeth further back, these are actually quite big ones, and they're all very, very flat in their shape as well. So suggesting it's more kind of a grinder in what it eats, rather than, you know, it needs its teeth to be able to tear meat off, which would suggest it's some kind of herbivore kind of animal.
Right, yeah, so yeah, the teeth are definitely a big clue there. And it's a very flat skull.
It is, yeah.
Like it doesn't have a kind of arch dome shape that you might expect.
No, it's got quite a small region where its brain would be as well. Yeah, it doesn't really have the same kind of surface area for the attachments for, you know, clamping down with your jaw like the hyena does.
Excellent. Well, let's reveal which one we've got here. The camel. Well done. I think we definitely had a few folk suggesting camel there. So well done if that was you're the one you got at home. Excellent. Let's move on to the next one. Right. So very different shape here. Looks like we've got some sharper teeth on this one.
Yeah, again, similarly to the hyena, we've got some very sharp teeth again at the front, which suggests it's a bit of a meat eater, and it tears, you know, the meat off the animal once it's caught it. And it's got very dome-shaped head. And it's quite a small skull compared to some of the others. And the nasal region is actually very, very small on this one, which means you can see kind of the sockets where the eyes would be just in the middle of the skull there. And they're quite far forward for the animal, which would suggest it kind of helps the animal with hunting, visualizing its prey and being able to catch everything very successfully. So definitely suggesting it's some kind of carnivore animal, a bit of a hunter. Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, definitely we can see from the teeth there as well, we've definitely got a predator. The eyes, good clue there as well. This is obviously an animal that needs good eyesight. It's got the large sockets there. So we've got a few guesses coming through. We've had kangaroo rat. We've had a couple of guesses for cheetah, another one for lion. So let's reveal what one is this?
This is the cheetah. Yeah.
Excellent. Well done, those of you that got cheetah. Definitely a carnivore, a predator.
Yeah, it's got a very small head compared to the rest of its body, which is quite unique for the cheetah. And again, its eyes very far forward to help it visualize its prey and run after it very quickly.
Excellent. Well done if you got cheetah. Right, next one. What have we got? We've got some interesting ones here. Now, this is a very interesting looking shape here. Tell us about this. There's quite a few interesting features on this one.
Yeah, so if you kind of ignore the bit on the top of the skull, what looks like almost ears coming out of the skull, This looks quite similar to the camel skull that we saw before. So again, a very long nasal region. It's got these quite big teeth, but further back in its mouth. So again, more grinding kind of action that this animal does. And it's obviously they're kind of suggesting it's more of a herbivore. So it eats plants, it's a vegetarian. But you can see obviously these bits on the top of its skull, which look like ears, but actually because they're showing up on the scan, it means that they're not really the ears of the animal, because in the outer part of your ear, you don't actually have any bones. So everything that's showing up on these scans is a bone. So it's suggesting that these sticky up bits are actually bones on this animal. So that's quite a big clue for this animal.
Okay, well, we've had some guesses coming through from several people are suggesting that it might be a giraffe.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
It is, yeah. Fantastic job, everyone.
Well done. Yeah, I think for me it would have been the shape. It's quite an unusual shape for the skull, isn't it, with those protrusions at the top of the skull.
Quite a pointy skull as well, I always think, on the giraffe.
Yeah, definitely. So well done, guys, if you got giraffe. That was a good one. Let's move on to another one. Right. Yeah. This looks like it's got huge eyes.
Yeah, it does have quite a big eye socket, and also it has these kind of teeth again at the front of the mouth, which is quite typical when they have them kind of coming out of the very, very front of the mouth. Quite typical of a rodent. So rats, mice, all those sorts of animals, very typical shape there that they have. And again, it's quite a long shape in the skull itself. Which is kind of suggesting that it would be some kind of rodent-y type thing as well.
Right. Yeah. So you can sort of see right at the front there what looks like little teeth poking down. You can definitely see the grinding teeth behind it, and the eye socket relative to the size of its head is very large. A lot of people guessing they think it might be the kangaroo rat.
Ah, good guess. This one is actually the jackrabbit. So similar, again, quite similar to the rodent-y kind of things. The skulls are very, very similar. Rabbits aren't actually a rodent, but they're quite very, very similar to the rat. So great guesses there, everybody. Again, you can see on the animal, it does have, quite big eyes, like you were saying, Alistair.
Yeah, that's it's a tricky one, and I guess one of the things that is very difficult when we're doing looking at it on a screen, of course, is that getting the scale can be tricky. If maybe if we put a scale and said the skull's like this big, you'd have been that must be the little rat. So yeah, tricky one there. Well done if you did get jackrabbit. Okay, let's move on.
So yeah, this is, again, quite similar, isn't it, Alistair, to the last one that we saw?
It is, yeah.
Teeth at the front again, quite long, suggesting it's some kind of rodent-y typed animal. So we've seen a couple of those today.
So I wonder if those that thought they'd seen the kangaroo rat already, is this perhaps what they were thinking of?
Yeah, it is. Again, they're quite similar skulls, really. I mean, they're quite closely related animals, so obviously there's a reason why they're quite similar.
There it is. Yeah, there's a little. I think that's our cutest animal today. Lots of people going for kangaroo rat that time, I think. Excellent. Yeah. Well done. Okay, let's move on, and we'll be testing you now on some of these. So this is an interesting one. Now, I don't know if it's the scan or this is how the skull is, but it looks like there's not the same amount of definition on this skull as we've seen in some of the others.
Yeah. I mean, this one could potentially be the scan itself, and that the specimen perhaps wasn't quite so well preserved as some of the others, because I mean, you can see with the teeth as well, you haven't really got the definition necessarily between the teeth. Again, it looks quite similar, to the rodent-y type things. This one isn't a rodent, to help you out. You can see at the back as well of the skull that it's kind of got this spirally bit at the back, which is part of its ear, and this is actually the inner ear, because there are a few bones not actually on the outside of the ear where you have what you would normally call the ear, but actually within the ear system itself. So suggesting it's quite good at hearing things, this animal. So
that sense is obviously important to this one.
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, so a few people I think are thinking it might be a bat.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. This is
Well done. Yeah, I think the hearing is the big clue there, isn't it? When you think about, hang on, bats have got quite impressive ears. They use the echolocation. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well done, guys, if you got back for that one. Okay.
Yeah, great job, everyone.
Moving on. And here we go. So these are all the skulls that we were looking at. So it's when you see them all together, you see it's kind of interesting to see they're all similar in some respects, but they've also got their sort of unique adaptations for that particular animal's lifestyle and environment, don't they?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Often these kind of adaptations are associated around diet, as we saw with the teeth, needing the big muscle attachments to be able to close and bite down on your prey. Whether you're a herbivore, so you have the kind of grinding teeth as well. So they are quite often associated with the diet of the animal. But great job, everyone. Really good.
Yeah, well done, guys. We had lots of guesses coming in there. I think a lot of people were definitely managing to get some good answers in there. So well done, and thank you guys for taking part. Unfortunately, we are well out of time, I'm afraid, for today. But it's been fantastic talking to you, Heather. Thank you so much for giving up your time and sharing your passion for all things mammals. It's been great speaking to you, and all the best in the rest of your work at the museum. And thank you guys as well for all of your questions and comments. It's been lovely having you join us again. Remember that Nature Lives Online take place on Tuesdays and Fridays, so please don't forget to join us. It's a different topic, a different scientist every day, so please do join us. Bring your questions. You can find us on all the major social media channels: Facebook, YouTube, Periscope, you name it, we will be there. So thank you very much for joining us today, and we hope to see you again very soon.